learners and parents at home. I am Matlatle ML, an educator at Mokwenenkonoko Secondary School. I'm here to present agricultural sciences for grade 10. The topic that we're going to cover today is agroecology. Under agroecology, we are going to look at the following: the ecology, component of ecosystem, interaction in ecosystem and farming, interaction between organisms in ecosystem, and symbiosis. Now, agroecology uses the interaction between an ecosystem's biotic and abiotic components to make farming more successful. Now, as we know, in agriculture, we study plants and animals. Now, here we are going to look at plants and animals regarding where they are situated, meaning plants and animals in the environment. Now, the question might be, what is ecology? Then when we talk about ecology, we are talking about the scientific study of the relationship between living organisms and their environment. Now, when we speak about the environment, or when we talk about environment, we mean everything that surround and affect the living organisms. In an environment, we have biotic and abiotic components. Now, one might ask, what is biotic and what is abiotic? When we talk about biotic, we are talking about living organisms. And when we talk about abiotic, we are referring to non-living organisms. Now, we have examples of abiotic components where we talk about sunlight, temperature, rainfall, wind, and soil. Then when we talk about biotic components, we look at plants, animals, fungi, and some tiny microorganisms where we refer the bacteria and viruses. So with the ecology, we study the interaction between these living organisms. We want to look at the plants, the animals, how do they relate with sunlight, temperature, rainfall, wind, and soil. So with the ecology, when we study that, for example, we can look at a farm where it has a plant and animals. Now we are going to regard a farm as a biotic component because it is having the soil where the plant will grow from. It is having the soil where the animal will graze from. Knowing about agroecology helps us to choose which are the best animals and plants to farm on a particular piece of land. In other words, we have to know the type of soil that we are having so that it's going to be compatible to the plants that we are going to cultivate. It also helps us to use the land in a productive way. In other words, when we have the right cultivar in the right soil, we are going to have productivity. Then we are saying there are living things that make up the environment, and they are structured into levels or layers. Now, the levels or layers that make up the environment are as follows. The first one is an organism. Now, a learner must know a definition of organism. What do we mean when we talk about organism? Organism, we mean an individual life form such as plant, animal, or microorganisms. Then the second one will be the species. A species is a group of individual organisms that are similar in appearance, behavior, and genetic makeup. Now, a group of individuals, we can talk about a group of plants or a group of animals, so long as they appear in similar, or they are behaving the same, or they have a same genetic makeup. Cattle, for example, sheep or goat. The next layer is species that live in a particular area. For example, all goats that we find in a certain area, we call them population. Then community. Community, we refer to all population of species that live in a particular area. For example, if we talk about all goats and all sheep and all cattle in a certain area, we are going to call them community. But if it's only all the goats or it's only all the cattle, we are going in population and community. Then the other one is the ecosystem. Now, with the ecosystem, we are referring to all living organisms in a particular area and the non-living environment. For example, we are talking about all cattle, plants, soil, water, and climate. Now, with the ecosystem, now we are talking a different thing, because we are talking about living organism combined with non-living organisms in the same environment. It can be cattle with the water, with the climate area, or the soil. We call it ecosystem. Right, now under agroecology we have the principles. Now the principles of agroecology uses scientific knowledge and indigenous knowledge for best farming. Remember, when we started, we spoke about successful farming. Now the first principle of agroecology is when we combine the scientific knowledge with the indigenous knowledge for best farming. The second one, or the second principle, is that we have to reduce the use of chemicals. Now, when we practice farming, we want to reduce the use of chemicals like inorganic fertilizers and pesticides. Rather, we can use organic fertilizers like manure and compost. Now, the last principle of agroecology is that we should conserve natural resources. Now, when we conserve natural resources, we are making it to be reserved for the future generations to use. So it is very much important that we conserve nature resources. Again, under agroecology, we look at the practice of agroecology. Now, how do we practice agroecology to make it successful? First, in order to avoid the use of inorganic fertilizers, we can use what we call crop rotation. Crop rotation, we mean that there are different crops that are planted in the same field. Now we are using the same field, but we are changing the type of crops that we're going to plant seasonally. For example, we can plant maize in season 1 and plant beans in season 2. This, it will keep our soil fertile, and also it will break the pest cycle. Remember, if we continuously plant maize in the same piece of land, we are inviting the pests. Now, if we interchange the crops, we are going to limit or break the cycle of pests. The second practice is polyculture or intercropping. When we practice polyculture or intercropping, we mean that we are going to plant 2 or more crops in the same field. In other words, we can have maize and watermelon at the same time in that particular same piece of land. Then the other practice can be agroforestry. Trees can be grown with annual crops This will increase productivity and diversity. We can plant the trees that takes up to 3 years, 4 years to grow with the annual crops that live once a year and die. When we cover the crops under the trees, we prevent what we call soil erosion. This increases soil fertility and it controls pests and weeds. Now, when we cover our crops, we avoid weeds, the unwanted plant. Animal integration as our last practice. It's when we have livestock that we keep in the farm in addition to the crops. Now we have the livestock and the crops in the same piece of land. In this way, the animals will eat the unwanted plant and it will produce the manure that will be used as fertilizers. So the animal will help us with the manure, whereas it is busy eating the unwanted plant in that particular field. Now, from the agroecology, questions that might be asked are as follows. Now, as a learner, we know that in section A, we have multiple choice, we have correct terms, and we have to change the underlined words to be the true words. Now, for example, one might be asked in multiple choice question the following question: which of the following is not a biotic component? And the learner will be given 4 options to choose. Now here, the first option is plant, the second one is soil, the third one is animal, and the last one is the fungi. Now the question says, which of the following is not a biotic component? Now remember, for you to answer this question, you must be able to know when we talk about biotic, we are talking about living organisms. So obviously the answer will be number B, because soil is not a living organism. Then the other question might be state and explain the importance practice of agroecology. Now here learners must be aware of the marks allocated. The question says state and explain 2 important practice of agroecology, and then the question is allocated 4 marks. That means you are going to state 2 important practice and explain 2 of them. You are not going to list 4 of them. You're going to state 2 and explain them. Then you're going to be allocated the full 4 marks. Right, moving forward, now we are looking at the components of ecosystem. Then the abiotic factor are classified into 3 groups: the physiographic, climatic, and edaphic factors. Now the physiographic, we talk about the slope, the aspect, and the altitude. With the slope, we are looking at how steep or how flat is the land. Can you practice your farming in a steep area or in a flat area? With the aspect, we are going to look at the direction of the slope, and then with the altitude, we are going to look at the height of the land above sea level. Now here we know that the higher the altitude, the lower the temperature. So as a farmer, we must be very careful when we choose the type or the area where we practice our farming. The second abiotic factor is climatic factor. Here we look at the sunlight, temperature, and the rainfall. Now with the sunlight, we look at how strong the sunlight is to influence an ecosystem. Plant need sunlight for photosynthesis. Now what is photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is when plants manufacture their own food. So it is important for them to use sunlight. Temperature, we are going to look at how it is going to measure how hot or cold something is. So the area that you are going to practice your farming, is it too hot? Is it too cold? Will your animals or will your plant be able to adapt to that particular temperature? So those are the things that you are going to look at before you practice your farming. Then again, the rainfall, we use the word precipitation to describe water that comes from the air. This includes the water, rain, hail, frost, snow, dew, and mist. Then we say plants have an average rainfall that they require, and it is measured in millimeters. Then the last abiotic factor is edaphic factor, where we look at the soil texture, soil depth, and the soil water. Now the soil texture, we look at how rough or how smooth the soil feels. Some soil are clay soil, some are silt, and some are sandy. Now this will also determine the type of crop that we are going to plant in that particular soil texture. Then the soil depth, we must make sure that we go deeper when we plant our soil. This will enable our soil to anchor, our plant to anchor on the soil, so that it is not going to be moved by the wind. The last one is the soil water. No, it's not the last one, it's the third one. Soil water. The soil water, we look at the water holding capacity of the soil. Some soil hold more moisture than other soil. We know that clay soil is one soil that holds more water. It means in most cases when we practice our farming, we can choose the clay soil. Then we look at the last one, which is soil fertility. Fertile soil contain more nutrients. We know that in the soil we have nutrients, macro and micro elements. Now we are saying in the soil, that is where we get nutrients. Now poor soil lack nutrients. Then fertility of the soil can be increased by adding the compost or adding the fertilizer in the soil. So those are the abiotic factors, the three groups: physiographic, climatic, and edaphic. Now we look at biotic factors. Now with the biotic factors, they are also classified in three groups, where we look at the producers, the consumers, and the decomposers. Now with producers, we talk about the green plants that can make their own food. During photosynthesis, plant changes carbon dioxide, water, and energy into oxygen and carbohydrates. In other words, during photosynthesis process, carbon dioxide, water, and energy are the factors that are going to be used in order for the plant to produce oxygen and carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, we talk about the fruits that we are eating from the plant, or it can be the vegetables that we are eating. Number B is the consumer. Consumers will refer to living organisms that cannot make their own food. Consumers can also be grouped into the following. We have the primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, omnivores, and the decomposers. Right, primary consumer, we are referring to the herbivores. They feed directly on the plants. Herbivores feed on the plants, for example, the cattle, the sheep, the goat. They only eat plants or grasses. The secondary consumer, we talk about the carnivores. This one, they feed on meat. For example, we can talk about the snake, the jackal, lizard, or the cat. Then we have the tertiary consumers, which are also called the carnivores because they also feed on meat. And then the tertiary consumers, we talk about the organisms that eat both meat and plants. Here we talk about human beings, pigs, or baboons. Then the last one is the decomposer. The decomposer is a class of biotic factor. This one It's a living organisms that get their food by breaking down plant and animal materials, such as dead leaves and animal trophy. Decomposers, we can talk about bacteria, fungi, and some large insects and worms. This one, they return nutrients to the soil.
Waterberg Furnitures is running a clearance auction for household appliances that includes beds, tables, chairs, and other home accessories. The household appliances are stored at Mogor Club premises in Onverwacht and are available for purchase at any time. Should you be interested, you can contact the store on 072 831 2481 from 7 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. from today to Thursday only. Terms and conditions apply.
To advertise on Waterberg FM, call our marketing department on 063 784 0131 or email us at waterbergfm993@gmail.com during office hours. Waterberg FM, go with the flow.
We are starting a new conversation. We are redefining your radio listening experience. Been around the block. Trendsetters. Waterberg FM, go with the flow.
Thank you. Moving forward, we have questions that might be based on the abiotic and biotic factors. Now here, a learner might be given a diagram that shows a food web perhaps, where it has the jackal, the cattle, human, chicken, eagle, and mouse. Now here, it is a food web where it shows with arrows that human beings might consume the cattle, cattle will consume the grass, jackal will consume the mouse, eagle will consume the chicken. And then they will be given numbers or they may be given letters. Now, for instance, in this one, in this food web, they are given numbers, where jackal is number 1, cattle is number 2, human is number 3, number 4, eagle number 5, mouse number 6, and the bacteria is number 7. Now the question says, indicate the number representing herbivore. Number A. Indicate the number representing carnivore. Number B. Indicate the number representing decomposers. Number C. And indicate the number representing the omnivore. Now a learner should look at the diagram that is being presented, and then the learner is supposed to give numbers, not names. The question says indicate the number. If jackal is number 1 and you know the jackal to be a herbivore, for example, you are going to state herbivore number 1. Now here they say indicate the number representing herbivore, number 2 carnivore, number 3 decomposers, number 4 omnivore. Now when we look at our diagram, number 2 is a cattle, it represents a herbivore. So when the learner writes number 2, it means the learner is correct. For the carnivore, the learner might write number 1 because number 1 represents a jackal. So the learner will be looking at the structure, and the learner must be able to know what do we mean by herbivore, carnivore, decomposer, and the omnivore, so that he or she can be able to give the relevant examples. Right, the other question can be, explain why grass is regarded as a producer. Why are we saying grasses are producers? Now the answer is that grass is a producer because it is able to manufacture their own food. Only the plants are the ones that are able to manufacture their own food. That's why they are called producers. Right, moving forward, we look at the other topic, subtopic, interaction in the ecosystem and farming. Now here we are looking at the organisms in the ecosystem, that are connected by the flow of food and energy. Here we are looking at the movement of energy from the producer to the consumer and then to the omnivores. Right. All living organisms need energy in order to live, in order to grow, and in order to reproduce. Organisms get energy by breaking down their food. Now the plants, because it's our first one in the food chain, they get their energy from the sun. Now during the process of photosynthesis, they are going to manufacture their own food. Right. Then the food chain, what do we mean when we talk about the food chain? We are referring to a series of living organisms where each organism is a source of food for the next in the chain. Meaning the plant will be eaten by the herbivores will be eaten by the carnivores. That is a food chain. So when we talk about the food chain, we are referring to the living organisms where each organism is a source of food for the next. Right. First organism in food is plant, as we all know, and they get their energy from the sun, as we said. Herbivores will eat the plant and get the energy from the plant. The carnivore will eat the herbivore and will get the energy from the herbivore. Then the example is that we have a grass that is going to be eaten by the mouse. The mouse will be eaten by the snake. The snake will be eaten by the secretary bird. So that is how the energy will be passed from one organism to the other. Then we have what we call a food web. A food web will refer to energy flow in an ecosystem that is much complex than a single food chain. Meaning with food webs, we are talking about more than one food chain. That is why we are saying it's more complex. Then this is the reason why we talk about the food web. It's that herbivores eat more than one type of plant. It is not always the case that the mouse will be feeded by the jackal will feed from the mouse. Sometimes the jackal might feed from the sheep. So that's why we are saying they are eating more than one type of organism. Then we say the food web is an interconnection of food chains and show the way in which all organisms in the ecosystem depend on each other for food energy. Right, here we have an example of a food web where we have our producer as the grasses. We have different types of grasses, the couch grass and the thatch grass. Then the grass can be eaten by the cow. The thatch grass can be eaten by the cow. Also, the cow might feed from the couch grass. Then we have the mouse that can be eaten by the jackal, and the jackal will be eaten by the leopard. So it doesn't mean the leopard will only feed on jackal. The leopard can even eat the cow or the human being. So that is why we say with food web is something different from food chain. It is complex. Then we have what we call trophic levels. With the trophic levels, we have a table where it shows type of organisms and the trophic levels. Now we have the type of organism number 1 where we talk about the producer. Now the producer is our first trophic level, and the primary consumer herbivore is our second trophic level, and the secondary consumer is the third trophic level, and the tertiary consumer is the fourth trophic level. So those are the levels that learners must familiarize themselves with, because when you say producer, it should be a first trophic level. It must not be producer, the fourth trophic level. It must be the first, and then the second one must be the primary consumer. The third one, or the third trophic level, must be the secondary consumer, and the last one is the tertiary consumer. Now, under this interaction in the ecosystem, questions that we might get in the examination or in tests might be the diagram. In most cases in grade 10, we are given a lot of diagrams where they shows relationship. Now in this one, we have an example where they say, study the diagram below and answer the question that follow. In the diagram, we have the grasses, and then we have the arrow of the springbok, and then the arrow that goes to the lion. Now it means here we have the grass as the producer, and then we have the primary consumer, which is the springbok, and we have the secondary consumer, which is the lion. Now the first question to learners might be, what does the above diagram illustrate? With the interaction that we have studied, we have seen example of food chain, and we also have seen the example of the food web. Now with what we have been provided here, the grass, the primary consumer, and the secondary consumer, they say illustrate the diagram above. What does the diagram above illustrate? Then it illustrates a food chain because it's not complex. Then what is the role that is played by the producer? This one we have answered it before. We said producers manufacture their own food, and then the second reason is that, or the second role is that when herbivores eat plant, the energy in the herbivores is passed on to the carnivores, meaning producers are the one with the source of energy. Then the third question says, mention the fourth trophic level. Now we said the fourth trophic level is the tertiary consumer. So those are the type of question learners might expect in the test or in the examination. And in most cases, these questions that I'm talking about are in section B, question 2. Right, now we look at the interaction between organisms in the ecosystems. We are saying organisms struggle to survive in the environment in which they live in. Main types of interaction between organisms are the following. There are interaction between organisms in the ecosystem. We have number 1, competition, number 2, predation and its prey. Now what do we mean when talk about competition in the interaction? We mean interaction between two organisms that both need the same resource that is in short supply. For example, water, food, space, shelter, or mate. Now when the animals or when organisms are competing for the same resource that is in short supply, for example, resources like food, water, space, shelter, or mate, we are saying that is a competition. Now in competition we have two types. We have the intraspecific competition and the interspecific competition. Now with the intraspecific competition, it occurs between organisms of same species. Organism of same species, for example, we can talk about when plants are planted too closely, they can compete for water, sunlight, and nutrients. Or the other example, planted, it is going to be difficult for them to get the same amount of sunlight, meaning the other one is going to get more of the sunlight, more of water, and more of nutrients. At the end of the day, the other plant will die. That is competition of same species. Now with two bulls, we mean that when they compete to mate the same cow, these two bulls want to mate one cow that is available during the mating period. Now it means these two bulls must chase each other, and the one that wins will be the one that is going to mate the cow. That is intra-specific competition, same species. It is very much important for a learner to look at the same species. It's going to differentiate the intra and the inter. Because when we talk about the inter-specific competition, we are going to talk about different species. Interspecific competition is a competition between organisms of different species. For example, when we talk about wheat that compete with plants for light and water. Wheat is an unwanted plant, so it is going to compete with the plant that we cultivated or that we planted for light and for water. The other example can be sheep and a cow, where they compete for the same plant when they are grazing. Remember, sheep is a different species from cow. That is why we say inter is competition between different species. The other one is the predation and the prey. Predation is the interaction between two organisms in which one organism hunts, capture, and kills the other organism. Now with the predation, we mean that the organism is going to hunt the other organism, capture it, and kill it. Then the organism that is going to kill the other organism is called predator. And the organism that is going to be killed by the predator is called a prey. Learners should know the difference between the organism that is a predator and the organism that is a prey. For instance, when we talk about the jackal and a sheep, a jackal will be a predator, a sheep will be a prey. Right. Now, we look at the questions that might follow under the interaction between the organisms. Like I said, learners are given different types of diagrams. So they study the diagram and then they are going to tell us what is it that is presented by the diagram. A learner is given a diagram of a jackal grabbing a sheep. Then on the diagram they say, study the diagram below and answer the questions that follows. It's a jackal is grabbing the sheep. Then they say, identify the type of interaction between two organisms illustrated above. Identify the type of interaction. The interaction that is on the diagram is predation, because we can see the jackal as a predator and the sheep as a prey. Then the second question that follows says, define the type of interaction mentioned above. That means after you have identified the interaction, you should be able to explain it in the second question. Define the type of interaction mentioned above. Predation is the interaction between two organisms in which one organism hunts, capture, and kills the other organisms. Then you will be awarded your 2 marks. Now they say, suggest 2 roles played by the type of reaction that you see. The first role is that it forms the important link in many food chains. The second one is that it helps regulate size of predator and prey population. Right. Then our last subtopic is the symbiosis. Now, the symbiosis is an interaction between two organisms that live very closely together. The organisms are called partners. Now we have 3 types of symbiosis. The first symbiosis is the mutualism. The second one is the commensalism. And the last one is the parasitism. Now, what do we mean when we talk about mutualism? Mutualism is a symbiotic relationship between two organisms of different species in which both partners benefit from the relationship. Now, the word mutualism comes from mutual, meaning both of the partners benefit from the relationship that they have. For example, we have the lucerne plant and the nitrogen fixing bacteria that live on the nodule or on their root, and then it means that the plant will get the nitrate from the bacteria and the bacteria get the food and protection from the plant. Now, in this relationship, the bacteria is not harming the plant and the plant is not harming the bacteria. The relationship is mutual. Right. The second one is commensalism. With commensalism, we talk about the relationship between two organisms of different species in which one partner benefits and the other partner is not affected. Commensalism, the relationship is that one partner benefits, but it does not harm the other partner. That is commensalism. Example we can give is the remora fish that attach itself to the shark and feed on the scraps of food that the shark leave behind. In other words, the remora, when it attach itself to the shark doesn't get any harm, and when the shark is eating the crabs that is left by the shark is being eaten by the remora, and then there is no harm in this type of relationship. The last one is paratism. Paratism comes from the word parasite. It's the relationship between two organisms of different species in which one partner benefits and the other partner is harmed. Now here the relationship is that the other partner is getting harmed. The partner that benefits is called parasite. The partner that is harmed is called the host. Parasites that live outside the host are called ectoparasite. For example, ticks, lice, and fleas. The parasite that lives inside the host are called the endoparasite, where we talk about the tapeworms, malaria, roundworms. Now, parasites have hooks and suckers. The hooks and the suckers allow them to attach to the body of the host. It's the one that makes it to be harmed. It's the one that makes the host to be harmed. The hooks and the suckers. Right. Then the questions from the symbiosis. Learners is given the statement or is given the extract. Now they say symbiosis in ecological relationship between organisms of different species. Then the learners are expected to answer the following questions. Explain each of the following types of symbiosis and give one example of each. Mutualism, paratism. You explain, after you explain, you give examples. Then you are going to be allocated 4 marks. Mutualisms, you explain what is mutualisms, and then you give example. Paratism, one organism benefit and it get nutrient from another, and another is harmed. That is paratism. So when you give the answers for this one,
you can finish.
When you give the answers for this one, you start by explanation, then you give the example. Now we have come to the end of our presentation for Agricultural Sciences Grade 10. Thank you very much for your time. Enjoy your day.